there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing and what to do when fly fishing sucks. It's wintertime, and that means that it is starting to get cold out there, as you all know from listening to this podcast, including the recent episode about indicators and indicator nymphing. That means that you're going to start fishing different places, which will probably mean tailwaters. It'll mean that the conditions are going to change. It means that the tactics are going to change. And it means, unfortunately, that fishing is going to slow down. It's just a reality that fishing in the wintertime is a different game than fishing in the summertime or the springtime or even the fall. It just is a completely different experience on a whole bunch of different levels, right? I mean, of course, the weather's different. It's colder. It's a little bit less pleasant to be out there. The tactics are different. The gear is different. So, of course, there are all those sort of practical considerations, but also, the fishing is different and your expectations have to change. And we've talked a little bit about that on the podcast before. But, if you're used to going out and banging 30, 40, 50 fish on a freestone, on dry flies, off in the middle of nowhere where they never see a human being, and then you go out to a tailwater and it sees 50 anglers a day and you're fishing for big fish who have tons of food washing down the river toward them, lots of pressure, PhDs and whatnot to eat. It's going to be a different experience. You might go from catching 50 fish to catching 5 if you're lucky. And you might have days where you catch 2. And the reality is on some of these really tough tailwaters and tough fisheries where the fish are incredibly selective and the fishing is incredibly technical, you might not catch any fish. That could happen, right? Getting skunked sucks. But if you're going to get skunked, it is more likely to happen in the winter because you just have a whole host of variables and conditions sort of working against you. I mean, I hate to say that because nature's just doing what nature's doing. It's not really working for or against anybody, right? But it does make it more challenging for you as an angler, and that means that you have to adjust your expectations. And sometimes, no matter what you do, you're just not going to have a great day out there. It's going to be slow. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a grind. It's going to be kind of a struggle bus. And that can be really hard if you don't expect it, if you don't have the right mindset, and if you don't have a sense of what the hell you should do when things start getting slow and frustrating. And I started thinking about doing a episode on this topic quite a while ago because it's worth talking about. You see the Instagram videos of guys who lose a fish and they're breaking their fly rod over their leg, or they're screaming and yelling, or dudes that are just in a shitty mood because they haven't caught a fish all day. And that happens quite a bit. There's actually kind of an inside joke in fly fishing, and I guess in fishing in general, not just fly fishing, that frustration is part of it, and that it's funny to be angry and mad and frustrated and throw your rod overboard because you're having a bad day. And, I suppose throwing a temper tantrum is one way to handle it, but if what you really want to be is an outdoorsman who respects the places where you fish, respects nature enough to know that sometimes nature's going to win and you're not going to win, and wants to be a little more adult, a little more mature, and a little bit more proactive and productive with that experience, then, snapping a fly rod over your knee and cursing your family's name, then this is the episode for you. And I've had the idea for a while because I think it's important, but I more recently have had some specific experiences that got me thinking about it in earnest. And most notably, I was out fishing actually this week. I went to a tailwater that runs through this spectacular canyon up in the mountains here in Colorado. And it's remote enough to be interesting. You got to use a rope to climb down in there. It's steep. It's not much of a hike, but it's not the easiest to access. A lot of people don't know about it. A lot of folks don't really go down there. It sees a little bit of pressure, probably, I would say maybe a little bit more than a little bit of pressure, a fair amount of pressure, but it's not as pressured as Deckers, right? Or some of the other big tailwaters. Sorry, Deckers, I'm beating you up again. But I went down there and I actually went 2 weeks in a row, which I don't do very often, but hey, my options are starting to get limited in the high country. It's getting cold. Water temperatures are coming down, spawn's starting. And that means I'm just sort of having to go back to some of these tailwater haunts of mine. And so I did 2 weeks in a row. And the 2 weeks were largely because the first time I went out, conditions were sort of questionable, right? It was a snowstorm coming in. The pressure was falling off a cliff. I mean, I have a barometer on my watch. and you can literally see the graph of this thing just falling off the cliff. The weather was chilly. It was obviously snowy. It was just sort of a tough day. Now, I did catch fish. The fishing was actually pretty good. And in fact, I had the chance to do some dry fly fishing, which is extremely uncommon to be doing in November, to be honest with you, but especially at that elevation. But that was great. Had fun. And then I thought the next week, I said, well, you know what? I'd like to go back there. I feel like I could have done better. The conditions weren't perfect. I'd like a rematch. And so I loaded all my stuff into my vehicle, which is now a Subaru Outback, on account of the fact that I crashed my truck into a parking pole. That's right, a stationary object. And so we'll save that story for another time, maybe another episode of The Wall of Shame. But it turns out I'm an idiot, and I crashed my truck. And so now my truck is sitting in the garage waiting to be fixed, and I drive a Subaru. So I loaded into my Subaru. I drove up there. I got my shit on, put on my waders, crawled down the slope, held onto the rope, got down there, hiked about a mile in, and started fishing. And I saw, 1,000 fish over the course of the day. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much of one. They were everywhere. Big fish, beautiful fish, fish eating, fish not eating, fish on the bottom, fish in the mid-column. I even saw a couple of fish jumping, which was kind of crazy. And I absolutely could not get anything going. I tried everything I could think of. I threw damn near every pattern in my box. I used just about every trick I know. I was changing flies constantly, changing depth constantly, shifting my indicator around. I mean, it was quite a thing. And I did wind up catching a few, so that's good. It wasn't a full skunk, but it was a struggle to get just that tiny handful of fish. And I was out there forever, right? I'd been out there for like 7 hours by the time I got back to the car. And it was just a tough day. And the thing that it was frustrating, I'm not going to lie to you, those days can be frustrating, even for those of us who have spent enough time out there to know that they happen. And it was more frustrating because I couldn't figure out why. And I think fly fishing we like it because it's kind of a puzzle. It presents you with a series of questions and a series of challenges that are yours to solve as an angler. And if you solve them, then you're rewarded with fish, and that's awesome. And obviously satisfaction and mastery and growth and all of those things which come from catching the fish. But you catch fish because you figured it out. If you don't solve the puzzle correctly, then you don't catch fish, and then you have an entirely different type of learning experience. And the most frustrating thing is when all the pieces of the puzzle appear to be lined up correctly, right? The water temperatures were fine. There was plenty of bug activity. There were visible fish. They were holding in water that made sense for where they should be at this time of the year. They were not spawning. There hadn't been any massive flow changes recently from the dam. The weather was fine. There wasn't like a massive pressure drop or a cold front coming through. As far as I know, there wasn't a ton of other angler pressure out there. Everything on paper was good. And still, the fishing sucked. And those can be the most vexing days because you just don't know what's going on. You can't figure out why it is that way. And, I was walking around thinking about stuff, kind of half-heartedly throwing a bobber rig at some of these fish here or there, but really had kind of lost my confidence. And I got to thinking, man, this sucks, and we really ought to talk about it on the podcast because if it happens to me, I know it happens to everybody else. Because the reality is it does happen to everybody. I don't care if you're a guide. I don't care if you've been fly fishing for 80 years. I don't care if you're the best damn angler that's ever lived. You're going to have tough days on the river, especially in the winter. And it's worth us talking about what to do when the fishing is slow. So that's what we're going to do today. And let's start with this. Let's start with the discussion of what slow means. And, this is kind of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography, right? You know it when you see it, but it's tough to kind of nail down. But I think that we can define it somewhat, right? Which is to say that I think that in general, anything less than about a fish every 20 to 30 minutes is pretty slow fishing. Now, that's obviously dependent on your skill as an angler, your gear, whether you're throwing the right stuff, where you are. So I don't want to say that that's a hard and fast rule. But I will say that, if I'm fishing for an hour and I only get one take, that's pretty slow. If I'm fishing for 2 hours and I only get one take, that's really slow. If I fished for 2 or 3 hours and I haven't caught a fish, haven't put a fish in the net, haven't had a fish convincingly hooked on my line, that is slow fishing, right? Which is to say that you don't have consistent action going on. And that might mean that you're not catching any fish. Might mean that you're only catching fish very occasionally. It might mean that you catch one fish early on and then you don't see another one for 3 hours. It could mean that you have an electric first 2 hours on the river and catch 15 fish, and then suddenly it just completely dies off like a switch. There are a whole bunch of things that could be used to quantify what slow fishing looks like. But in general, I think that it is about, anything less than about a fish every 30 minutes is looking pretty slow. And really, anytime you are cycling through tactics and using your knowledge and your gear and your flies and everything that you know about being out there as an angler, and you're still not able to hook fish, that probably means that the fishing is pretty slow. Now, I don't say that because I want you newbies out there to go out and be like, well, shit, I don't ever catch fish, and so it must always be slow for me. Like I said, this varies a little bit. When I first started fishing, I didn't catch anything for like 5 or 6 months, as you guys probably know from listening to the podcast about my fly fishing story and how I got started in this sport. But I think it's worth noting that this can vary on the same river with 2 different people on the same day, right? So you could have one guy who goes down there and for whatever reason, maybe it's skill, maybe it's luck, maybe he's just in a different spot, maybe the stars align, whatever it could be, but he has figured out whatever the trick is for that particular day. And he's catching fish, but you're not catching fish, right? And we've all had days like that. I remember when I first started out fly fishing, I would spend all day flogging the water, catch absolutely nothing. And then I would walk back to the truck and walk past some 80-year-old man standing up to his knees who's just hammering fish like it's going out of style. So slow fishing doesn't necessarily mean it's slow fishing for everybody. It could just mean that you're off for that day. You're just not hitting it right. There's something else going on. You're not in the right spot, whatever. It could be 100 different variables. But it could be slow for you and not slow for another guy who you see fishing. Or even worse, it could be slow for you and not slow for your friend or your buddy who you're fishing with. And that can be tough. It can be tough to swallow, but it's worth remembering that, slowness is not a universal thing. There are days where the whole river is slow and everybody has a shitty day, of course. But there are other days where there's nothing wrong and you just, for whatever reason, didn't figure it out. You didn't have the pieces, or you didn't think about it the right way, or whatever. You just didn't quite get there. And that's okay. The question is not what you did wrong, right? I mean, obviously it's a learning experience. You always want to improve. But the real question is, what do you do when it's slow? When it is slow and there's not a lot going on and you feel that kind of bubbling frustration inside you that's like, man, what the is going on? Oh, I'm going to have to bleep that out. Sorry. What is going on out here? What should I do? Nothing's working. Bah. That's the feeling that we're going to talk about today and how to deal with it. Now, before we get directly into that, I do want to talk about a few things, right? So I just said a minute ago that it can be slow for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which you'll understand and some of which you won't. And that's just the way it is. Fish are weird animals. Rivers are complicated ecosystems. You're never going to have all the answers. But there are some reasons that fishing might suck that are outside your control. And they're worth us mentioning because sometimes it helps to have at least a possible explanation in your head to grab onto about why things are not going your way. And one of the biggest ones that we should throw out there is water temperatures, right? So this could be both absolute temperatures. So if you're fishing in water that's like 33 or 34 degrees, that's really cold water. And even if you're seeing fish, they're probably laying on the bottom. They're probably not feeding. They're probably not doing a whole lot of anything. You're going to have a tough time catching them. It's going to be a slow day. Another one is flows, right? So especially fish in tailwaters, those are controlled by dams. The dam managers, who are usually affiliated with, utilities companies or water companies or local governments handling water supply and downstream demand, they change flows all the time. And on some of these tailwaters, it's not uncommon to see massive changes, right? You could go from 150 CFS to 800 CFS in a matter of hours, which, in addition to being dangerous for anybody who happens to be in the river, can really disrupt the ecosystem because that is a massive change in the volume of water. It's almost equivalent to like a flash flood, and it disrupts everything. It disrupts the bugs, it disrupts the substrate, it disrupts the fish, and that can turn off your fishing. You could also have the inverse, where flows are usually 500 or 600 or whatever they might be, and suddenly they drop to 50 and the dam pretty much shuts off. There are a few tailwaters not far from me that do this. They'll run at 100 or 200 CFS for most of the warmer months, and then the water managers drop them down to like 10 CFS or 15 CFS, which makes them almost unfishable because it puts a ton of pressure on the fish. It isolates them into these sort of deeper pockets. They don't have many options for where to go. They really can't spread out. And the result of that is that the fishing can get pretty tough because of those flow changes. And so flows are another one, which is one more reason that you should go online every single time you're going out. And if there is a USGS or a state water monitoring system on those streams, you should be checking the flows. I know it's annoying. I know it's kind of cumbersome. I will be honest, I don't do it 100% of the time either, unless I'm going somewhere where it really, really matters. But it's good practice because it will help you predict sort of what you should expect for that day. Another factor is the weather, right? And so there could be a ton of stuff going on with the weather. You could have, depending on where you are in the country, there could have been a bunch of rain that washed a bunch of mud and debris and sediment into the river. That can jack up water clarity. It can increase water turbidity. It can make fishing tough. But also, especially in the wintertime, weather brings these big temperature swings. And those temperature swings are associated with weather fronts and cold fronts. And, we've talked about this many times before. There are people who swear that barometric pressure changes and cold fronts and all of that stuff does not matter for fishing. I think those people are dead wrong. And I know many, many, many longtime anglers and scientists who agree with me on that point. Doesn't mean we're necessarily right. Doesn't mean it's proven science. But just from an anecdotal, observable perspective, I do believe that sudden pressure changes can really screw up your fishing and turn the lights out. So if you were fishing in the middle of a massive cold front that just rolled through, it was 50 degrees yesterday, now it's 15 and snowing, fishing might be tough. If you are fishing right as that cold front hits, or you're out there and suddenly it drops off a cliff, it gets cold and windy, and then it's, a blizzard, fishing might suck. So those weather conditions can have a lot of impacts on your fishing experience that you're just not in control of. And you might not be able to predict, right? You should be checking the weather forecast, of course. But the reality is you might not always be able to predict what's going to happen. Weather, especially in higher areas, higher elevation areas, can be unpredictable. It's not your fault. It can just happen. And then, of course, you've got other factors that really aren't in your control, right? So you could have other anglers, for instance. This is one of the big ones. So when you're off fishing in the middle of nowhere on some creek nobody's ever heard of, then the chances of you having to deal with the serious effects of angling pressure, relatively low. You can be reasonably certain that probably nobody has touched it for a while before you got there, or at least for long enough that the fish have reset, the river's reset. It's probably not a huge deal. But once you get out onto those tailwaters, even the ones that require a hike, that's a totally different ballgame. Now you've got dozens or hundreds of people going through that water every single week, sometimes every day, depending on where you're going. And that does add an element of pressure. And, I think it's worth us having a conversation at some point, maybe a full episode about the effects of angling pressure on fish. I know that's something that a couple of other podcasts have tackled, and I have my own thoughts on it. So maybe we'll do that one of these days. But for now, without going too far into that whole thing, which is quite a can of worms, it is worth knowing that just because it looks like the river is pristine doesn't mean that somebody else didn't come through there 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, splash around like crazy, flog the water with their lines, skip rocks, whatever they might have done. You'll never know that. You can't know that, but it is a factor that could make your fishing slow. It can make the fishing suck. Then you have a whole bunch of other things that could happen, right? You could have like bad chemicals in the water of some kind. This happens a lot below mines, not so much in tailwaters because they're below reservoirs that are pretty tightly controlled, but you'll occasionally see mining runoff or some type of chemical runoff from a spill or from a highway nearby or anything else, and that can affect both the water and the fishing. You could have sediment from a landslide or a rock slide that goes into the river and messes up the fishing for a little while. You could have heavy rain or heavy snowmelt, which again is sort of a weather-related thing, but could wash a bunch of junk into the water, which can mess up the fishing. And then you could just have this sort of je ne sais quoi going on out there. Because the truth is, sometimes the fishing is going to be slow. It's not going to be great. And you're just not going to know why. And that's not because you're stupid. It's not because you are missing some information. It's not because you didn't read enough books. It's not because you are not educated enough or because you're ignorant or any of those things. It's just because rivers are extremely complicated ecosystems. And sometimes stuff's going on that I'm sure makes perfect sense to the fish and the bugs and the birds and everything else that lives in those kind of crazy riparian areas, but doesn't make any sense to us hairless apes walking around on the bank trying to figure out why we can't catch a fish. And that's okay, right? Because the takeaway that I want you to have from this episode is that we are out there not to dominate the river, not to win against the river, not to demonstrate our incredible levels of competence or manliness if we're a man, or womanliness if you're a woman, or anything else. It's not about conquest. Fly fishing is not about conquest. It is about growth and it is about mastery, but those deal with conquest over yourself and the development of skills. Trying to conquer nature is not something that we ought to be doing, in part because it's kind of futile, right? I mean, we can't conquer nature. People have been trying for as long as we've been around, and yeah, we've figured out ways to control aspects of it, but it isn't a controllable thing, and pursuing it for that reason doesn't make sense. But second of all, it just sets you up for frustration because nature, as I've said many times, does not care about you. It doesn't care that you want to catch fish. It doesn't care that you're doing everything right. It doesn't care that you can't figure it out. It doesn't care that you're frustrated or sad. It doesn't care that you really needed this one day to work out because it was your only day to go fishing. Nature doesn't care. And we are out there not to beat nature, not to win, but to experience nature, to respect these places, and to accept the fact that sometimes the river just isn't going to give it to you. And that's okay. It's part of the experience. It makes you a better person. It makes you a better angler. And it's not something that should be leading to incredible amounts of frustration or anger or anything else. It's just part of the game, guys. So then the question becomes, how do you deal with this, right? So you're out there, the fishing sucks, it's slow, you don't know why, you've tried everything you can think of, and you're starting to get that feeling. You all know this feeling, right? Your confidence tanks, your confidence tanks, your attention starts to wander, you start thinking about other things, you just sort of get that bleh feeling inside you. And you'll know it when you feel it. Anybody who's been fly fishing for any length of time knows that feeling. And so once you get that feeling, you have a few choices about what you do with it. The first one is that you could just, push through it. I'm going to fish anyway and figure it out. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. I've had days like that. And to be honest, I have had days where I have somehow magically turned it around. I don't know for sure whether it was something I did or if the conditions just changed, but that has happened. It's not commonplace. It's not the most likely outcome, but it has happened. And if you want to just push your way through it and get there, see if you can catch fish anyway, cool, dude. Like, have fun. The second one is that you could get frustrated and angry. And this is like the cussing, throwing your rod on the bank, sitting down and just kind of huffing and puffing about it. That's an option too. You're welcome to do that if you want. It's not very productive. It doesn't produce anything for you. It's not really cute to see a grown man sitting on the side of a river, and crying into his soup about the fact that he can't catch fish. But if that's your thing and you need to get it out, then hey, save it for your therapist and have fun out there, buddy. But the third thing, and my recommendation, is that when you feel that sort of vibe and you're like, man, I just don't know if this is going to happen today. I'm losing interest. I feel myself getting frustrated. Maybe I just need to do something else. What you should do is something else. Okay, so you don't have to fish to enjoy your time by a river. And I know that that sounds like a crazy thing for a fly fisherman to say, because of course, when I'm by a river, I'm probably fishing. In fact, it physically hurts me sometimes to be by trout water and not have a fly rod. So I get it. But you don't have to fish all the time, and you don't have to fish all day. And if you've had a frustrating morning and this isn't working out for you, it is okay to set the rod down. It is okay to do something different. And in my case, something different usually looks like something productive, right? I don't want to just kind of sit there and stare at the sky and feel bad, although that's perfectly viable. So if you're interested in that, then you can do that. It's up to you. But what I really like to do is I like to spend the time productively. I'm out there anyway. I spent the time to get to these places. I spent the time to hike into them in most cases. I don't want to just like throw my hands in the air and hike back out to the truck. I want to spend the time productively because those days are important to me. And so I think of other things to do, right? And those things can vary. I will sometimes sit on the bank and just watch the river, just watch what's going on. I'll watch the bugs. I will watch the fish. I will watch the wildlife, beavers and eagles and hawks and other types of birds and all sorts of stuff. There's a ton of really incredibly interesting things happening in these ecosystems that I think sometimes we don't notice because we get the fly fisherman's tunnel vision. And if you stop for a minute and you stop fishing and you sit down and you let yourself cool off, and as a way of respecting the place and the ecology of where you are, just sit and watch it and appreciate it. Pay attention to the rhythm of it. Pay attention to the intricacy of it. Pay attention to all the little details that you might miss when you're in this sort of single-minded pursuit of fish. And you will find, number one, that your respect for the water will deepen. Your general understanding of the water will deepen. And you will find, number one, that your respect for the nature and the natural beauty of these places will deepen. But also, you might learn something, right? You might see a behavior of a mayfly that you haven't seen before. You might see trout doing something weird that you haven't seen before. You might catch some odd detail about a certain bend in the river or an eddy or a beaver dam or whatever. You might see a bird doing something funny. You might be able to see the fish react to the presence of a bird or another predator. But there's a lot of stuff that you can learn there, both about the river generally and about the fish and fishing specifically. And so I'll just sit down, I'll kick back, find a nice comfortable rock in the sun, and I'll just watch. And I might sit there for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. Who knows? I'll just sit there and watch. And to be honest with you, when I look back on my fly fishing career, those days are some of my favorites. I mean, I love catching fish. I love being in the water. I love the act of fly fishing. But I also have very fond memories of just sitting on the bank, watching the water, and thinking. And that's the second thing, is thinking. Right. So going back to last season where we talked about the reasons that we're out there fly fishing in general, but specifically in the backcountry, chances are we're not doing that just because we're like, man, I really want to go far out in the woods and hang out there because it's rad. I mean, it is rad and it's fun and it's cool. But a lot of us are out there because we're searching for something, right? It could be growth. It could be, going back to that episode last season, we could be wrestling with ghosts of loss or challenge or decision. We could be looking for growth. We want something that we can learn and challenge ourselves with and excel at. It could be grace, so the need for peace and solitude and a place that lets your soul rest for a minute in a way that the modern world doesn't. Those are all part of the experience. And to be honest, they're all, in a lot of ways, a bigger part of the experience than the fishing itself. And so if you're out there and you're in these places, the places are what make the magic happen. It's not necessarily the fish. It's not the size of the fish or the type of the fish or how many you put in your net. The thing that provides the therapeutic value, at least to me, is the place itself. And so if I can sit and I can enjoy the place and watch the place and be immersed in the place and then spend the time thinking about whatever's on my mind. It might be a challenge. It could be an opportunity. It could be a question. It could be a interpersonal sort of introspective thing. I mean, there are probably 100 different things that I could think about out there. But if you want the best possible place to sit and meditate, you will not do better than being next to a beautiful stream or a lake or anywhere else, watching the water, listening to the nature, listening to the sounds of nature around you, and just appreciating the beauty of the planet that we live on. You won't do better than that. So if you're looking for some thinking time, if you need to work through something or make a decision or let something go or whatever, this is your opportunity. And the river might be telling you, hey, today's not a fishing day, dude. Today's a thinking day. And maybe what you ought to do is just sit down and think. And to go with thinking, you can write. And I don't mean to be too smoke in your socks, like piping tobacco tweed jacket guy here, but I always have my phone so I can write notes on that, but I'll often carry a journal with me out there too. And if I'm having a rough day or a slow day, I might sit down and watch the river for a while. I might think about and process whatever I happen to be working on that day. And then, I might write about it. And I could write anything, right? It could be a journal about the day, just a story of the day. It could be a log of the conditions or what I think is going on. It could be me sort of working on the fishing problem and seeing if I can articulate what I think might be happening. Or it could be something else entirely. It could be me writing a letter to somebody or a letter to myself or some type of therapeutic work of dealing with and putting on paper and coping with something that's a challenge for me, or working through the pros and cons of a decision. I mean, there are a million things that this could be. But sometimes you sit down and you think, and then it makes sense to write. I've actually written portions of books sitting by rivers because those are the places that speak most to me, get my creative juices going. So, it could be writing for you. It could be drawing. It could be painting. I know people that go out and actually paint by the side of rivers, or they like to draw the river or a bird or whatever it might be. And all of those things are awesome. They are ways for you to sit with, be immersed in, and engage with the natural place that you're in, the wild place that you're in. And that's an awesome thing to do, especially if the fishing sucks. So don't forget about that. Bring a pad and paper, bring a pen, bring your phone, whatever. Bring an easel and some paint, bring whatever you want to do. Bring that stuff with you. And when you do eventually have one of these days, and I promise you're going to have a day like this, it's not going to be man, the fishing sucks and I guess there's nothing else to do here. I might as well go home. You can still take that opportunity to enjoy and glean some benefit personally and mentally and emotionally from being in that place, which is the main point for being out there. So don't neglect that, okay? And then finally, you've got sort of the practical aspect of this, which is that you could use the time to explore, right? So when I was out in this canyon earlier this week and the fishing was terrible and I just couldn't quite get anything going, I sat by the bank, I watched the river, I watched the fish, I thought about some stuff. I did actually do some writing on my phone. I wrote down some notes and some thoughts that I had been kicking around in my head for a while. And then I needed to move around a little bit. So I got up, I actually packed up my fly rod, believe it or not, because I knew I was done for the day. And I just went exploring. I walked down the bank way further into the canyon to see what it was like down there, to see what the access points look like, to scope out the water, to take some pictures, to do all of that stuff. And it's amazing how far you can go and how much you can see and how much you can learn about a place. And I don't mean just the place itself, but I mean everything about the place. What it looks like here, what it looks like there, how do you get into it, where you might want to stand the next time you fish, whatever it might be. If you're not fishing and you're not jumping between spot and spot and spot, looking for that next water, thinking about fishing, and your mind is clear, then you have an amazing opportunity to really study and learn and explore that place. And that has value in its own right. It might not have anything to do with your next fishing trip, but it could, right? It could also be useful scouting information for the next time you come. You might find a new spot you want to try out. You might find a trail you'd like to explore. You might find a campsite that you could use next time you're there. Whatever. I mean, there could be a million different things that could happen, and they might be related to fishing or they might not. But if the fishing is terrible, and you know it's terrible, and you don't have any reason to believe it's going to get better, which most of the time it doesn't, sometimes it's okay to just use that time to be an outdoorsman, not a fly fisherman, not an angler of any kind, just an outdoor person who just wants to be outside and study and learn and explore and get around in these incredible places to see what they have to offer. That's an awesome way to spend your time too. And in fact, I spend a huge chunk of my time doing that, even when the fishing is good, right? The fishing could be incredible, but once I catch, 30, 40, 50 fish, I mean, I would love to keep fishing, but I don't need to keep fishing. And sometimes I'll put the fly rod away and I'll do the same thing. I'll go wander and look and explore and take pictures and appreciate. And it's honestly one of the best experiences of being in these wilderness areas and these wild places, even beyond the fishing itself. The fishing is great. It's obviously the main attraction, but man, there's a lot of value and a lot of beauty and a lot of learning to be done in these places if you are willing to take a walk and do the work. And then when you're done with all this stuff, it's time to go home, guys. Or maybe you don't want to do any of this stuff, right? Sometimes you have a day where it's frustrating enough that you're like, you know what? I got stuff to do at home. I just don't really want to do this. It's time to go. That's okay too. It is okay to pack up, hike out, and go home. I struggled with this early on because I felt like it was a failure, like I was quitting or giving up or whatever. But the truth is, That was never the case. It was just me recognizing that on that particular day, the river and nature were just not going to cooperate with me because they don't care about me. And I had other places that were higher priorities for me, things that I wanted to spend my time on. And that's okay. It's not giving up. It's not quitting. You can always come back to those places. They did not beat you or defeat you. You don't need to be embarrassed about it. You don't need to stress about what people are going to say if they ask if you caught anything when you get home. You can just pack up and go home with your head held high and look yourself straight in the mirror and say, man, the river kicked my ass today and I just didn't figure it out. Okay. And accept it, right? I mean, yeah, go home, read about it, try to learn about it, try to figure out what happened. I'm not saying there should be no learning there, or at least an attempt at learning, but just accept it for what it is, and accept it for what it is without shame or guilt or fear or any of those other ridiculous ego-driven emotions that we anglers experience sometimes. Just take it on the chin and roll with it and accept that it's part of the game, accept that it's part of the sport, accept that it's part of being in nature. Go get in your car, drive home, go on with your life, because you're going to have another shot at it real soon. So guys, I hope that helps you. I know a lot of this seems like common sense, right? But man, I have spent so many days being frustrated myself or seeing other people being frustrated or, like I said, watching videos of people being frustrated and seeing the memes that I really felt like it made sense to, number one, talk about it as sort of a confessional and say, I have hard days too. We all do. But you're not alone in that. But also just to talk through the fact that that's okay. And here's some stuff that you can do instead. And so I hope you take that with you. I hope the next time that you have a rough day out there, you remember this conversation. I hope you sit down, you watch the river, you do some journaling, you do some exploring, whatever it is you need to do out there. And you still find the beauty and the majesty in these incredible places that we are fortunate to have and to see and to be able to experience. So I hope you don't have any tough fishing days this week. Hope it is lights out incredible and you're catching 25-inch fish all day, every day. But if it doesn't happen that way, that's okay. I hope you have a good week anyway. And I will see you guys back here real soon. Till next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. And if the fishing sucks, maybe we could just sit on the bank and talk about life.